Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and this video we're breaking down It. Probably the scariest thing 5-year-old me ever saw. I vividly remember Pennywise keeping me up at night. I can even recall the first time I saw the VHS in our local video store and being terrified of that clown with the creepy hands. Of course, curiosity eventually got the best of me and I ended up watching it. And I realized I'd made a huge mistake. Whoo shit! The It universe is just about to expand with a brand new HBO show, and I wanted to return to Derry to break down the original adaptation. Long before 2017's landmark It Chapter 1 and the middling It Chapter 2, this Stephen King story was traumatizing everyone. Broadcast in 2 parts, it attracted 30 million viewers, despite reviews being very mixed. However, I think it's a pretty entertaining adaptation, but it suffers from having a lot of content cut. Having just reread this brick, I think that's no surprise. The 1986 novel weighs in at a hefty 1,138 pages, which, fucking, can you hear that? Now, the way I tend to read things for reviews is I'll read a couple of chapters at night and then through the day, go for a walk or something and put on the audiobook. I tend to basically go to the end of a chapter, mark where that is, and then on the night, pick up where I left off. However, some of the chapters on the audiobook come in at over 4 hours, which is just under the length of most of the normal books that I read. It's an absolute epic that goes through several decades and spends entire novels worth of text just talking about things like Stan's business. So I can imagine it was a nightmare to adapt. Even the modern adaptation had trouble bringing it to the screen despite clocking in at around 5 hours for both parts. But we will be going through all the changes and what was left out. Now originally it was going to be an 8 to 10 hour series, which might have given us more of the story. That would have been broadcast over 4 2-hour blocks with Georgie Romero picked to direct it. That unfortunately fell through, and King's adaptations have always been a bit hit and miss. Famously, the author wasn't a fan of The Shining, which many people, myself included, view as the best one. King was a hot property in the 80s off the back of it though, and he's had countless adaptations. The Dead Zone, Carrie, and Stand By Me are absolute classics, and after Pet Sematary, ABC bought the rights to it. One of my favourite things about the book is that it kind of plays off the coming-of-age story of King's Stand By Me, but there's a massive horror twist to it. That's also what ABC were after as well, and they wanted to bank on that 50s nostalgia, all while giving kids nightmares. That nostalgia though was rampant throughout the 70s and 80s, with American Graffiti and Grease being massive successes. So they quickly got to work, and the writer put in charge of it was Lawrence D. Cohen. He actually wrote the script for Brian De Palma's Carrie, so was no stranger to King's work. He originally wrote both parts, however, due to issues with his script, he decided to leave the project. His work was kept for one though, with Night 2 being written by someone else. That was because originally Episode 2 was a wild departure from the source material. Cohen's early drafts actually ignore the flashback formula that we get in the book and show. If you've ever read it, then you'll know that characters literally smell or hear something that instantly throws them back to the past. Sometimes even mid-sentence. However, he decided to scrap this, and because it was mainly the adults in the second episode, that was described as being very melodramatic. The spider was also heavily hinted at in part 1 when Pennywise was hit by a rock. But all of this was of course changed, and the producers opted for extensive rewrites. Director Tommy Lee Wallace changed it all up and made sure the flashbacks were included and that it matched the novel's style and pace. Now, Wallace gets a lot of crap for this, but I think he did a decent job considering the mammoth task ahead of him. Making Mike the narrative lead that connected all of it was a great decision, especially as the main story doesn't really have a true main character. He did, however, reveal that he never actually read the book fully and kind of just guessed some stuff. This was also in a time before Wikipedia and plot summaries that were written by AI. He did later go on to read it and has admitted that he thinks he fell short of the text. However, I do think the guy did a great job and never would have guessed that he never actually finished it. There was also some restrictions with the production and, being broadcast on a Sunday night also meant he couldn't go all out with it. Therefore, they didn't portray all the blood-curdling horror of King's book in full and skipped over some of the more controversial scenes. I do think it feels almost like a sitcom at times, especially the stuff like the bike montage. Like, what's that about, mate? However, I think the thing that people remember about this movie and what takes it to the next level is the incredible, unforgettable performance by Tim Curry. The guy has amazing range, and he can go from playing like Dr. Frankfurter and Rocky Horror to a video game icon.
I'm just a sweet transvestite. I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
I remember seeing him in Home Alone 2 as well and thinking he was the Grinch brought to life. Tim Curry is what made this a phenomenon, and his Pennywise is an icon of horror. In the book, he's described as a cross between Bozo and Clarabelle, but he goes above and beyond to step out of their shadows. And yeah, there's a reason these days I think most people haven't heard of them, but they have heard of Pennywise. He was so scary, casting crew would avoid him between takes, and it might be because he deliberately scared all the child actors behind the scenes, which I can imagine also scarred them for life. He wasn't initially the first choice though, and they actually toyed with casting Alice Cooper. In the end, I think we ended up in the best timeline though, and he cements himself as one of the most iconic horror villains of all time. Now, I will be breaking down the Blu-ray, which contains both episodes as one unbroken movie. However, if you're watching it episodically, then episode 1 ends when the Losers Club think they've defeated Pennywise. Episode 2 then picks up with Stanley's death. Spoiler alert! Now, the opening credits are accompanied by pictures of Derry and the Losers Club. A picture book is a massive scene in the story with one coming alive to taunt Bill. This also thematically tells us that we'll not only be dealing with the past, but also the future as we transition to the cinema in the present. Or the 90s, but you know what I mean. Things are kind of dilapidated now, and it highlights that nostalgic yearning for the good old days of yesteryear. In the 50s, we can also see the Paramount Cinema showing I Was a Teenage Werewolf, which is a real movie that came out in 1957 that of course later inspired Teen Wolf. It's a movie we see the kids spending the afternoon watching until Henry Bauer chases them out the cinema. Pennywise of course also takes the form of a werewolf, so I love this little bit of foreshadowing. Now that monster was of course missing from the 2017 adaptation, which was most likely due to the past scenes being set in the 80s. The book itself is set in 1957/1958 and 1984/1985. The show is set in 1960, but we do get some stuff from the previous summer in 1959. But if I say 50s or 60s when it's the other decade, then apologies, I'm sorry. I love how both versions of the adaptations kind of play with the time gaps though, and have Pennywise disappearing for a period of 30 years. Now, I've never been to Derry, but I have heard people say that the series doesn't really capture the look of it. The miniseries was filmed in Vancouver, Canada, with Chapter 1 and 2 being produced in Ontario. I do feel like Andy Muschietti's movies get the look and feel of Maine down a lot better than this miniseries, but I haven't been to Maine, and if you have, let your Maine man know. We then see a fork of lightning, which ominously hints at the storms rolling in. This is of course playing off what happened to Georgie, and it shows how history's repeating itself. We catch a young girl riding on a trike singing the Incy Wincy Spider, or Itsy Bitsy Spider, which some people always correct me on. But that's how I was raised, and that's what makes this country great. This nursery rhyme of course foreshadows the spider form of Pennywise at the end, and it's also about getting washed down the drain, which is a pretty clever way to play into what happens with Georgie. In the book, they talk about how the floods have gone on for days and days, and are getting worse and worse. The sewers can't contain it, and parts of the street are drifting away. This storm also somewhat ties in the end of the story, as when Pennywise is killed, most of the town falls into a sinkhole, which is caused by all the destruction in the sewers. In the book, we learn that Pennywise somewhat built up the town around it, and thus there'd be a constant supply of food. The text even says how Pennywise is Derry, and Derry is Pennywise. So in dying, it destroys a large part of the town. A flood's how we begin and end the tale, and it beautifully brings things full circle. And whereas we get the girl here, the novel opens up on Georgie. Though we get that scene later, I love how this is presented with Pennywise flashing in and out of the washing. Cutting before she's grabbed, we don't really know what happened, but we do know that it's every parent's worst nightmare. The child has simply disappeared. Now though this girl's brand new for the adaptation, she's kind of a mix between Laurie Ann Winterberger and also Matthew Clements. Their deaths set the curfew into effect and sent the town into a frenzy. We then cut to the aftermath and see the police are wearing yellow raincoats. This reminded me of Georgie, and I did wonder if that was deliberate due to all the opening changes. It's here that we meet Mike Hanlon, who's played by Tim Reed. He was a staple of 90s and noughties TV shows and played Ray in Sister Sister, which I only realised on this breakdown. I realised it was Ray. Amazing what a mustache can do, but TV royalty right there. I will not have a bad word said about Ray. Now we discover that Mike stayed behind after they fought Pennywise, which was due to a sense of duty. Thus he spent years preparing and researching the town's history. All the other characters' memories have faded over time, whereas it's still very present for Mike. In the book, we learn Mike paid a police officer $20 to get info on the killings. So his connection to the police here makes sense. He picks up a doll from the drain which reminds him of Georgie, and then Mike finds a picture of the character which is the same one that later appears in the book. It's Pennywise clearly taunting him and showing that the kids didn't kill him. Well, her. Yes, Pennywise is female in the book, with a spider being its true form. It has eggs, but yeah, I know I'm going to call Pennywise at least he once in this video, so apologies in advance. Now in the book, Mike just told his friends about the picture at the reunion, but I do like that we see him pick it up. It's a show don't tell thing that confirms his suspicions, and we discover Mike merely thought it was sleeping. We then learn about the blood oath, and all swore to return to Derry should it ever return. He then calls each one of his childhood friends to get them to come back and destroy the evil for good. When we see him making his phone calls, the newspaper on the desk is also from the 1930s, which indicates he was researching the last Pennywise haunting from before their one in the 50s. Now, haunt is the correct term there, and part 2 of the book even opens with asking if a town can be haunted. There it explains that haunt also means a feeding place for animals, so it ties into what Pennywise is using Derry for. In the book, the modern murders are shown when a gay couple is targeted by homophobes, and the text doesn't shy away from using slurs, so it's a very brutal scene. Adrian Mellon's been attacked and thrown over a bridge, which is when he's torn apart by Pennywise. The scene was included in 2019's It Chapter 2, and though I think it's one of the best chapters in the book, I think the repetition of the kid's disappearance probably works better as the first killing that we see. Throughout, the music is also very, very Twin Peaks. It feels like the title theme tune of that TV show, and both episodes were inspired by Lynch's classic TV show. Both seasons of Twin Peaks were broadcast on ABC, and that show also opens with a murder. That's then investigated, with a supernatural cause being found. Pennywise's influence on Bev's father also feels like it's inspired by Laura Palmer and her dad. Other than Twin Peaks, the director was also inspired by the movies of John Carpenter, such as Halloween and The Fog, which you can definitely feel throughout. Tommy Lee Wallace actually worked on both Halloween and The Fog, firstly as an uncredited Michael Myers under the mask at points, and also as a ghost in the latter. From seeing Carpenter up close, he also went on to write and direct Halloween 3, so yeah, lots of attachments to those franchises, which clearly helped him to make this movie. The first calls then made to Bill Denborough, who's busy writing his screenplay in his fancy London home. This is a change up from the book, as there Mike calls Stanley first. Obviously he takes his own life, and it adds to the mystery of why returning to the town's so terrifying. Like the book, Bill is a writer and his work's being adapted into a movie. I'm sure I don't need to flag up the self-insert comments there, and a lot of King's works have main characters that are writers, who also come from Maine. In the book, he's adapting his book The Attic Room, and his wife Audra is also starring in the movie. We actually see the set of said movie in Chapter 2, and the miniseries does have some fun with the idea that builds a Stephen King insert. Later in the library, we do see a display promoting how he's Derry's biggest export. There's a book called The Glowing, which is very clearly a parody of The Shining. The book also has a long section about how he was contracted to write the screenplays for his adaptations, but that Hollywood always messed them up. King actually wrote the screenplay for The Shining, which Stanley Kubrick then threw out, so it did feel like a little jab. There's also Highwire, Gargoyles Dance, and Gnaw. Highwire is an espionage book, which at a reach could be inspired by The Dead Zone. Gargoyles Dance may have been inspired by Nightmares in the Sky, and the Gnaw's likely inspired by Cujo. There's also Smile, which may be a take on Misery due to the knife on the cover. In Pennywise, The Story of It, we can also see they originally had King's actual books on the stand, but maybe it was a rights issue and they couldn't do the stand on the stand, eh?
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Now, the thumbs up's right there, but Bill then picks up the phone and he's told the evil has returned and his stutter starts to come back. This phone call then sets off a memory and he's taken back to the past. To me, Pennywise is essentially a metaphor for childhood trauma and the evil overlooked. Be it evil bullies, adults turning a blind eye to sexual assault, or at worst murders, the trauma has just hurt these kids so much. And that town ain't right. Nowadays, we see how each of the kids has gone on to be successful despite what happened to them in the past. I actually have a theory that beating Pennywise basically showed how strong they were as people, and thus they succeeded in the outside world. They needed to be strong in order to defeat him in the first place, and thus them being successful makes a lot of sense because of, what they are as people. However, there is also the theory that it had something to do with their success. There is the belief that if they ended up wealthy and happy, that they might not come back to the town. Which is also a read that I think works perfectly with the movie. But what actually is it? Well, the being is billions of years old, and originally it came from a universe that surrounds our own. This is called a macroverse, and it came from that place via an asteroid and then landed on Earth. This was millions of years in the past, and eventually that location would become Derry. It went into a slumber for all that time, but was woken up and would feed every 27 years for roughly a year or two. Now, the being's counterpart is the turtle, a lovely turtle who's called Maturin. It sees itself as the superior to Maturin and considers humans as its toys. 300 settlers arrived during 1740, and almost overnight, they all but disappeared. This disaster was inspired by the mysterious Roanoke colony disappearance, and this basically began its cycle. Now in the book, Bill sees the turtle twice, but the miniseries ignores all this backstory. And to be fair, you can understand why, because it's crazy turtle called Maturin that roams the galaxy. The more recent adaptations, though, have had a little nuds to it, and I really hope they explore it and welcome to Derry.
There was some kind of force guiding us that summer.
Now in the book, Pennywise also goes by the name Bob Gray, which it uses to gain kids' trusts. Introducing himself as that in the book, it then lures people in and uses the power of the deadlights to basically hypnotize its prey. It then eats them and just goes out in the town looking for food. We see this happening firsthand and get Bill's flashback to the day that Georgie died. We hear his mother playing Fur by Beethoven, and this comes directly from the book. Bill says the music in the house wasn't quite the same after this day, and hearing that song sets off the memory. The young Bill's played by Jonathan Brandis, and they do some subtle things to make him appear more like the older actor, including the addition of a mole. Brandis is a great part of the movie, but sadly he passed away in 2003 after taking his own life. He'd hoped that a role in Hearts War would kickstart his career again, only for it to end up being a deleted scene, which is really sad. But behind the scenes, he had the most acting experience and helped the rest of the kids with their roles. In Bill's bedroom, we can also see a typewriter on his desk and a picture of the Lone Ranger above his bedside table. His bike is called Silver, and he keeps saying, "Hi-yo, Silver" in the book. There's also a picture of a wolf foreshadowing Pennywise taking the form of a werewolf. Now this scene's just like how it is in the source material, with Bill laid up in bed while Georgie begs him to play, or even read him a story. The whole scene's very faithful to the work, and the young boy has to go and get a paraffin from the cellar. I don't blame him for being petrified of going under the house either, and the book expands on what he finds down there. There, Georgie swears he sees something and can smell the sewer. Clearly, the creature's stalking him, and it's in this moment that it decides it's going to get him. Now, much of Bill's trauma comes from almost a survivor's guilt. This is because in the book, he revealed that he pretended to be sick that day, and has lived with the guilt that he wasn't there to protect his brother. The sad irony is that he gives Georgie a boat so good that it sails down the street perfectly. Had he not cared so much and put so much effort into it, then it probably would have fallen apart before hitting the drain. We then properly meet Evil Incarnate, aka Pennywise. When I was writing this script, the kids actually walked in at this point, and I probably watched the formation of a childhood trauma before then kicking them out. And they were in for like a second, but I know for a fact it's scarred them for life. I love how Tim Curry also has his New York accent and sounds like a clown who's smoked 20 a day for decades. Though I was never scared of clowns off the back of this, I swear down. I know a couple of people who've said their fear comes purely from this scene. It was even supposedly the inspiration for the 2016 clown sightings, which simpler times. I think this film definitely kickstarted the craze though, and movies like Terrifier owe a lot to this movie. The makeup for Pennywise was done by Joanne Smith, who also worked with Tim Curry on the movie Legend. The original design of Pennywise was far more advanced, but Curry had such a bad time in the makeup chair on that movie that he said he wouldn't go through it again. And the producers realised he could do as scary a performance without all the prosthetics, so they granted him his wish. Curry would wear yellow contact lenses as well, and even had 2 pairs of false teeth. His look was also based on 1925's The Phantom of the Opera. Also, shoutouts to Seaswell for pointing out how the storm drain scene was inspired by a creepy 60s McDonald's advert. We then see him luring poor Georgie, which is when he attacks. It plays off the whole notion of how you shouldn't talk to strangers and then goes above and beyond scaring you. Because of this, I do wonder how many kids thought twice before talking to a clown in the drain. And hey, maybe Georgie deserved it. I'm not saying he deserved it, but I wouldn't have talked to him. Now, they do censor the death from the book, but I do prefer that they don't show his arm torn off. Eddie later mentions it, so we do know it happened, but I definitely prefer the less is more approach. We instead cut to his coffin and once more see the rain blasting the characters, showing just how depressing the town is. And yeah, I can't imagine having to deal with the death of a sibling like this. A lot of the violence here is insinuated as opposed to being shown, and this was due to the strict standards and practices that the show had to stick to. But ultimately, I think your imagination does the work, and yeah, as a kid, I filled in a lot of the blanks and probably imagined stuff that was even worse than what we get. Now, it's here at the funeral that we meet each of Bill's friends. Wait, is that Seth Green? Yes, it is! It's funny, as Richie's scared of werewolves, and Seth will go on to play one in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. After the funeral, we then get a big scene from the book where the picture of Georgie winks and bleeds. We also get our first hint that the parents aren't right either, as his mum has blood on her hands, but neither can see it. Both parents are confused, and most of the adults in the story don't see what the kids see. This is explained in the work, and Pennywise somewhat hypnotizes the town. This is why the police never figure out what's going on, as they're kind of made to be apathetic. It's also a clear metaphor for adults never believing children or putting their fears down to a child's imagination. The Derry curse isolates the youth, and this helps Pennywise feed with relative ease. Bill then explains everything to Audra and how he forgot about his brother's murder. Audra was cut quite heavily from it chapter 2, with her being on set briefly. But this shows her a lot more in the same vein of how she's portrayed in the book. She's played by Olivia Hussey, who played Juliet in the 1968 adaptation of Romeo and Juliet. She's also Norman Bates' mother in the Psycho sequels, and Psycho is something we'll be breaking down very soon. We then get Ben Hanscom's call in
New York City.
Though he was bullied as a kid for being fat, he's now become a rich architect and a bit of a ladies' man. He is very different from his book counterpart though, who lives in Nebraska. In the work they tell us he designed the BBC building in London, which was actually the Derry Library just turned on its side. In the book, we join him in a Nebraska bar where he rattles off the story to a bartender. He even leaves him with some valuable silver coins that he says once saved his life. When discussing his weight, he also talks about a coach and says how that basically pushed him to lose it. So overcoming bullies and proving them wrong is a big part of his life. Ben here is played by John Ritter, the late TV legend who was in Three's Company, 8 Simple Rules. And of course, the really fun Problem Child movies. He heads to the top of his in-construction building, and I did wonder if they were going to go the Stanley Eurus route with him. Like Bill, his childhood tics come back as he puts his thumb to his mouth. We then cut to the younger Ben, who wears baggy clothes despite it being summer, but the book explains that this is done to hide his weight. Both actors who play the character came up with this thumb idea, and it was a way to make adult Ben seem more connected to his younger version. Mainly due to the fact that they look the least like each other out of the rest of the kids and adults. Brandon Crane, who plays the young Ben, also had a cameo in it chapter 2, and he can be seen when Ben's in the boardroom. In the scene, we learn that he's just came to Derry, and in the book discovered that he'd been moved from town to town due to his dad being in the military. The teacher also says,
"Welcome to Derry,"
with this being used as the title for the new show. You can also see the president's photos above the chalkboard, which has Richard Nixon, but actually, he did not become president until 1969. Despite Henry Bowers being an absolute knobhead and bullying him for his weight, he instantly locks eyes with Beverly Marsh, setting up their future relationship. Emily Perkins, who played Bev, was actually inspired by her mother, as she was also named Bev and lived in a similar home in the 50s.
What a porker.
Henry's then sent to the principal's office and given detention for the name calling. He mentions how his dad's gonna tie on his hide, which is something explored a lot more in the modern movies. In the book, we learn that his dad beats him, and as Henry believes, this is how he should treat people. He's also already repeated this grade, and will be again, which is something that's only mentioned in the book. Derry actually has a vendetta against Ben specifically because he tried to copy his test answers, and Ben wouldn't let him. Ben figured out if he could avoid him for the summer, he'd then go to high school and would never see him again. However, they obviously can't do that with this being Ben's first day, so instead he just gets punished for oinking at him. Henry being kept back though has made him the biggest kid in the class, which he of course uses to his advantage.
As you know, The sheriff has instituted a 7 p.m. curfew.
Now we see how most of the kids are social outcasts, and Bev's ridiculed for her dad being a janitor. In the book, Alvin Marsh was actually staff at the Derry hospital, whereas here he works at the school. In the book, she was also a bit of a cool kid and didn't really talk to Ben. But here, she introduces herself to him. Ben then goes home, saying her name, and in both the book and show, he then composes a haiku. Unfortunately, the war moment's cut short when Henry tries to carve his name into Ben's stomach. This dude is less Danny Zucco and more Danny Succo. Oh! In the book, we hear his pals' inner thoughts and how they don't actually think he's going to do it, and are surprised that he's actually a psychopath. There he does get the H though, which is on Ben's stomach for the rest of his life. It also describes how he uses his weight to his advantage, and then he kicks back from Henry and manages to pull the gang down the hill. Here though, he just sends himself off and gets a good head start. Ben then escapes into the barrens while the bullies confront Bill and Eddie. I really like the slow zoom in on the kids as they now have new targets, and it's almost like a predator catching them. The scene gets repeated later when Ben returns to Derry, showing how traumatic it was for the young lad. They pretty much take the scene from the book where they kick down the dam and cause Eddie's asthma attack. In the work, this went on for hours, with Ben having to lie low for quite a while. Also, question: why does Belch keep doing that? Either way, they then go off looking for Ben, and Ben gets to make some new friends. He also name drops Dr. Kiddo when saying Eddie might fall into a coma. But actually, that show didn't air until the 27th of September 1961. And this is set in the 50s. What the hell? In the book, Bill then runs off to get his medicine and he takes his bike silver. In the future, Bill wonders how many times it saved their life, and we get an explanation of him going to the pharmacy. Turns out the pharmacist just gives him out placebos, and he thinks how Eddie's mum's making him think he's sick, which is what they kind of touch upon here, albeit very subtly. Eddie's asthma actually gets better on its own, showing that he never really had it. In the book, Bill gives him the placebos, and he's immediately cured after it. But I do like the change as he breaks the illusion himself, and it plays nicely into his character. Though he does still take it and acts like it has an effect. Now, like nearly all of the losers, Ben's home life is absolutely terrible. His cousin's a dick, and he's forced to live with them as his father died in the Korean War. His aunt's helping out his mother due to her being poor, which is actually something that happened when he left Derry. She shamed him for eating too much, and he would even eat on purpose to try and anger her. In the book, he just lived with his mother at this point and had long periods of time in solitude. His mum actually put some rules in place, and we got a great scene where she ended up buying him a watch. She says no matter what, he has to be back by a certain time, otherwise she'll immediately call the police. And this watch is just a constant reminder. However, he loves it, it's his favourite possession, and kind of highlights how she loves him deep down. All that stuff with his cousin and aunt though is brand new for the show, and she's looking after him because she says it's her Christian duty. Really though, she's just ashamed her sister's on welfare. Again, the music here is fantastic though, and just like Twin Peaks, it hits before something weird happens. We then see his dad standing out in the barrens, which is just above Pennywise's lair. This whole scene's inspired by a scene from the book in which Ben sees Pennywise as the mummy. That's of course a classic Universal horror creature, and Ben saw it in the winter when the canal was frozen over. However, it does get referenced later when Eddie heads into the creepy house. In the book, a balloon floats up to him, which we do sort of get here as his dad transforms. In the text, Ben notices the balloons are floating against the wind and decides to make a run for it. I love the way here his dad kind of transforms as we cut away, and he gets more and more clown-like. We didn't have that fancy CGI back in the day, so they had to make do with doing stuff like this, but I think it works really well. In the book, Ben says he can smell the sewage and water on the wind, and that damp feeling almost consuming him. In the show, a skeleton then crawls out the water, and pretty traumatizing.
And when you're down here with me, fat boy, you float too.
Him calling him this is also what he'll later do when he says,
"Kiss me, fat boy."
We then cut to his love, Beverly Marsh, who's now a fashion designer. She's with an abusive man named Tom Rogan, who kind of mirrors her dad. Their company is called Beverly by Hand, and I did wonder if that was playing upon how he hits her. Like Audra, he has a much bigger role in the novel, and we get a full chapter where we basically see inside his head. He and Bev have a fashion house together, but he's controlling and abusive. There's a scene where he sexually assaults her and she stays with him, so in his mind, this is something that she needs. So again, it kind of plays in the idea of trauma and how people can shut down because of it. Really, she's kind of just like a battered housewife who hasn't learned to stand up for herself. This call is what makes her finally do it, and she also confronts the fear of her husband, and in some ways her dad. Smallville fans will of course recognize Annette Toole, who plays the adult Bev. In this early meeting, she says she can't stop shaking, and Tom says fear spreads like a cancer, and thus he won't have it around. It's a great line which plays upon the theme of fear, and rather than hiding from it, it's better to confront it directly. It is only subdued in the end when the kids start to ignore their fears and finally stand up for themselves. They then go and meet Japanese businessmen, and it's a bit of an odd scene as it lingers on them for quite a bit. But if you watch it again, you can see how Tom doesn't bow, which is a sign of disrespect. However, Beverly does, which kind of plays into her personality. Despite this, they clearly won the contract as we catch them in bed with champagne. However, she gets a call to return to Derry, which might have been a bit of a relief compared to living with this absolute twat. He's ugly and fat in the original text, but yeah, he's like a Patrick Bateman-esque psycho. He implies he'll keep her locked up, but she hits a fastball that not even the best baseball player of all time could hit. Babe Ruth! This is just like how she defeats the clown by throwing an object, but back then she was very, very handy with a slingshot. It dinks his head, and it looks like he has a concussion, as Bev says she'll kill him if he ever goes near her again. It's kind of bittersweet though, as Bev is free of her current nightmare, but she returns to her childhood one. In the book, she then goes and stays with a pal, but this got cut completely from the adaptation. Probably because they cut Tom Rogan's subplot out of following her to Derry. The friend isn't needed, and in the book he tortured the pal to find out where she was going. The book even went through his backstory and home life, and we discovered he was beaten by his mother, which is why he acts like this. This is another running theme in the book, showing how parental abuse can be cyclical. We then flash back to the past and see Ben's dropped off the aforementioned haiku. It catches the ire of her father in a scene that somewhat mirrors Tom shouting at her. Highlights just how she's left one tragic home life and went into another. Her dad is wildly abusive, and in the book, he's an incestuous nonce. However, this is played down in the TV version, which you can see why, because it might have been too dark for TV in the 90s. Her father also didn't find it in the book, and her mother's also missing from this miniseries. Again, there's a lot of content cut, but her mother started to suspect her husband was a bit too into his daughter. Shooting his shot, Ben then asks her to come to the Barrens with him as they plan to rebuild the dam that was destroyed earlier. This is a major section of the work as well, with it taking up most of the summer. A policeman arrives and then tells them they have to kick it down because it's been backing up all the drains and causing floods, further playing into the idea that Derry's about to erupt. Richie also does an impression of the Irish officer and basically just rattles off his voices, which Ben says all sound like Richie. Either way, he arrives referencing Gunga Din, which is a poem about an Indian water carrier in the British Army. He's joined by Stan, who stands at the back and seems a lot less confident than the rest. Richie, of course, will go on to be a TV comic, and this kinda lays the groundwork. Ben also says he just knows the dam is going to work, which is a section that comes directly from the book. Even without any qualifications or studies, he just instinctively knows how things are built. The dam also works, and it shows just how small Ben is compared to the rest. Sadly, a lot of his brain power is cut from the movie, and we barely get to know the Losers Club at all. We also see the love triangle beginning to form as Bev clearly likes Bill. It's implied she thinks he did the haiku, but it's later explained she knew it was Ben all along, so why are you teasing him? Poor lad looks heartbroken. In the evening, we then see her dad watching 77 Sunset Strip on TV. This was an ABC crime show that aired in the late 50s and early 60s, and it's also name-dropped in the novel. Interestingly, we see him drinking a beer, but in the book he was a teetotaler who prided himself on not having any vices. You know, other than being a nonce. In the bathroom, Beverly hears children in the pipes, which are long dead and have been killed by the clown. Everything all goes back to the sewers, and that's of course where we find its lair at the end of the miniseries. Now, the book explains that Betty Ripsom's voice can often be heard coming from the drains.
I'm Vicky Burrows. I'm Matthew O'Connor.
Here though we get Victoria Burrows, who was actually the casting director for the miniseries, and Matthew O'Connor, who was one of the producers. They say, "We all float down here," that kind of thing, and this is quite literal as their bodies were found floating in the water of the sewers. Pennywise also levitated their bodies before eating them and left some in suspended animation. When the bully later sees the deadlights, he floats and goes into a pipe, so this might be what he means. A red balloon-like blood ball then explodes in the bathroom, but her dad's unable to see it. Now, in order to excuse this, she says how a big spider went down the drain. This of course foreshadows Pennywise's true form, like the itsy bitsy spider tune. Once again though, the clown's an allegory for abuse and how kids will often cover it up. He says that if she tries she'll die, much like how abusers try to isolate their victims from their guardians. We then cut to Eddie, who's living with his mother. He actually lives in a place named after your mum. Great neck. Interestingly, Eddie was almost played by Jim Carrey, which I think would have been wild. Dennis Christopher is great as a neurotic limo company owner, but I would have loved to have seen Carrey in the film. In the book, he actually lives with his wife, who is just like his mother. So like Bev, he's ended up marrying his parent. They change over the film, and I do feel it's a comment on how basically Eddie's a virgin and also possibly gay. Back in the 90s, you couldn't have an openly gay character on TV, at least around this time, so they do kind of set it up without spelling it all out. His mother also isn't fat like the book, which is something that's mentioned a fair bit. This is much more like a Norman and Norma Bates kind of vibe. The scene plays out a lot like the book though, but in that he asks his wife to pick up Al Pacino, as opposed to his métier. They don't mention Pacino all out, but do say Al, and if you read the book, you know, it's big balls out here! We then cut to the flashback of the kids watching I Was a Teenage Werewolf and to see them all wincing. In the book, this was just Richie, Bev and Ben, however, the novel has so much character story, it works well in the movie to just have everyone together. You can see Bev cuddle up and hide between both Ben and Bill, playing up the weird love triangle that happens in the story. Things go a bit different though in the book. Eddie doesn't drop his popcorn because, yeah, he isn't there. Instead, Danny Fucko and the rest of his friends just see Bev, Ben and Richie and then chase after them. I do prefer that they add the kids doing it to the gang though, and it kind of shows they're not that cowardly and will still stand up to Henry. They kind of get their strength in numbers, and I think this sets it up here in what's very good shorthand. They then go past the Barrens, and in the book they also talk about the house on Nearbolt Street. This is the place where Pennywise resided and was what the kids referred to as a haunted house. It's quite a big omission from the story, which the 2017 at Chapter 1 thankfully included. In the book they'd go past there, and Eddie once saw a leper that he was worried would infect him. The leper even talks about, you know, trying to give him a BJ, which is really weird when reading it, and it just kind of plays into the themes of abuse. We then see Eddie's mother, who's dressed similar to the 60s, at least in this movie. She's wildly controlling and won't let him take a shower with the rest of the kids, due to the germs. Ultimately, this leaves him isolated, and his coach demands that he goes back and washes. In the book, the coach played a bit of a bigger role, and like the pharmacist, he knew there was absolutely nothing wrong with him. His mother has instilled a fear of showering in public though, which is why Pennywise weaponizes it so easily. We see the showers start to turn on and extend, which then start coming towards him. It's pretty good use of special effects as they appear almost snake-like. Pennywise then comes out the drain, tying into how he's connected to the sewers. Him coming out the plug was done using stop motion, and I think it was actually a pretty good effect there for the 90s, but according to the reviews, terrible! He also calls him Girly Boy, which plays in the fact that people suspect that he's gay. There's also the fact that boys' changing rooms like this are said to be a place where abuse has happened. I think because they don't kill it as well, they simply suppress it. It kind of plays in those themes of how we have childhood abuse here. Eventually though, it always comes to the surface, and at some point in your life, you have to confront it, even if you try to forget the memories of it. Eddie then starts to have an asthma attack as Pennywise and shows his teeth and yellow eyes. Granted, it doesn't seem scary now, but back when I was a kid, fucking hell! We then cut to Richie, who's grown up to be a comedian on TV. While in the book he was one of the biggest radio hosts in America, they obviously updated it for the time. He's got a photo of him kissing a woman backstage, but nobly, the new editions changed him to have feelings for Eddie. Played by Harry Anderson, he was a comedian, actor, and magician in real life. I love the way it's all hustle and bustle though, and we follow him from the stage to the dressing room in one unbroken shot. Everyone's trying to talk to him and get his attention, but Mike's phone call, that's what cuts through the noise. Arguing with his partner, I love the way they're framed in different boxes in the house, showing how separate they are mentally. He wants him to stay in Beverly Hills and do his commitments to the network. However, Richie has his commitments to Derry, which is ultimately far more important. His mate doesn't even get how serious it is, and even suspects that gangsters might be involved somehow. After getting a flash of the werewolf, we then cut to the past, where Bill's reading a story about magic stones being used to defeat a dragon, possibly foreshadowing the adventure they'll go on to defeat their own monster. He even calls the Silver Slug stones when they confront Pennywise. We also learn that Bill actually wrote this piece, which sets up his turn as an author. Before Georgie was killed, he actually asked him to read this story about the magic stones, and I do like seeing his early development as a novelist. Now Eddie also says he wants to be a train conductor. This might be a little nod to the book, as trains were something which were mentioned quite a lot. They helped grow Derry through exports and trade, but they eventually led to a major decline during the Korean War. That stopped passenger trains and basically cut off a lot of the economy. This is a really great scene though, as the kids share what they want to be when they grow up. Despite the murders and threat of the killer clown, they're still looking to the future, showing that there is some hope, which is why the kids are able to defeat Pennywise the first time. The fact that they've all came together to build this dam as well shows that as a group they can basically stop the forces of nature, which Pennywise very much is. They realise that when coming together they still have a hope for the future, which is something that their parents don't really have. This hope's exemplified perfectly in Ben, and even though his dad was killed in the Korean War, he still wants to be a fighter pilot. Richie then says he wants to go to Hollywood and meet Sandra Dee.
Look at me, I'm Sandra Dee.
He also says he wants to be a rock and roll singer. In the book, he was obsessed with the show American Bandstand, and his mum despised rock and roll.
Rock and roll is here to stay.
Wait, it does take place in the Grease universe.
What is this? A crossover episode?
Stanley then says that he likes cataloguing things and finding a logical order. It kind of speaks to why he loves watching birds and then became an accountant. Sadly, the movie doesn't really go into his adult life that much, and he's a very undeveloped character, especially compared to the book. The Irish cop officer now then appears with one of the worst Irish accents of all time.
That means together all the time.
We also hear how Velma Daniels' body's been found, whereas in the book this was a boy called Jimmy Cullen. Kids going to the Barrens puts them in danger, and he makes them swear to stick together. They of course defeat Pennywise as a team, and it's this oath that expands out for most of their lives. Back at school, Richie's then confronted by Henry Bowers. In the book, they didn't actually return to school because it was the summer holidays, and this moment happened when Richie was chased through a department store. Making a mess, he's then, wait, is that cigarette smoking man? Is this where he started investigating aliens from? It's him! Anyway, Richie's sent to get a mop from Mr. Marsh.
Go downstairs and get a mop from Mr. Marsh and clean us up!
Which, though he doesn't show up, you know, it is Beverly's dad, and it's just a nice little connection between the characters. He then encounters the teenage werewolf before it's revealed as Pennywise. In the book, this happened at Neobold Street, but I actually prefer the school. We all kind of went into those weird dark rooms somewhere in a building that we think we're familiar with, but there's a certain section where it's like, oh, I don't like going in there. And yeah, it just kind of plays upon that fear. Popping out, saying it's a werewolf, all the kids laugh at him, but in the end, he's literally the kid who cried wolf. They think he's joking around because, yeah, that's his personality, but his friends look very, very concerned. Each one of them's had their own bizarre encounter with a clown, and slowly they open up about what happened, which is kind of what unites them. In more recent times, you know, we've had things like the Me Too movement where people have come forth and basically all shared their stories. They kept it to themselves for quite a long time, but once someone came forward, then countless other people were like, yeah, that happened with me as well. Me Too movement is, of course, a more contemporary thing, but that's just kind of where my mind goes to. But yeah, throughout history, there's been all these kind of instances where abuse has happened and then people have united years later to take it down. So I do actually think this works really well in hindsight, and retroactively it kind of keeps the movie timeless. Those children laughing though, that still haunts him, and the mocking is of course shared by the clown. Which, with Pennywise's voice actually being mixed into the kids laughing. Jumping over to Mike, we then see him reminisce over the photo at the train yard. We learn he's fascinated with history, and he tells the story about the Kitchener Ironwork explosion. Now this was a major part of the town's history. There was a big Easter egg hunt there, lots of kids came to it, but the ironworks exploded and basically killed them all. The kid's head was even found in a tree days later, and it put the town into a state of grief. Mike also tells the class about the Derry sandpipe and the disappearing settlers. These are all featured heavily in the book interludes and are really gripping. They just break up the story, and it's like getting a mini short story that's absolutely terrifying. They're intended to show just how evil it is and how it's all connected to these disasters. Most adults barely remember or even lie about seeing Pennywise at these things, and it shows how the clown can affect memory and basically make you suppress your fear. Later, Bev realizes that the teacher didn't know about it at all, and it might be why she tries to wrap up Mike's presentation, as she's under the spell of the Derry curse, or as they call it, the Derry disease. Basically though, every single adult tries to ignore what's happening and hopes that the nail that doesn't stand up won't get hammered down. Does that make sense? But yeah, there's definitely that feeling in the town that most of the adults will turn a blind eye, and we even see that Bev's ignored when Henry Bowers and his gang try to assault her. In the modern movies, Ben was of course the one who read up on this, and it tied into his love for the library. That was a place he went to due to not having friends or wanting to go outside, but I do probably prefer that they combined that there. Mike's love for history is such a big part of the book though, but unfortunately we lost a lot of great details from the novel. We have Mike interviewing lots of Derry citizens, including a policeman who regrets never solving some of the cases. As we can see, Henry's really rude to Mike, and in the book they had a major familial beef. Henry Bowers' father burned down Mike's dad's chicken coop and he was ordered to pay restitution and held a grudge ever since. He blamed the Hanlon for his poverty while they had a decent life due to hard work, which is kind of hidden out when they get out of school, as Henry says that Mike's family's been giving them grief for a long time. Henry calls Mike the N-word throughout most of these scenes, and Jared Blancard actually apologized on set for doing it. But yeah, it was part of this. It wasn't like he was saying it himself, you know, it was part of the script. But yeah, there's a massive racial element to it, and the Bowers target them because of their skin. Missing from the movies, also the fire at the Black Spot. Mike's father set up a club for other black soldiers, and it proved to be really popular. Bands came to play, and people from the town became loyal customers. It even featured Dick Halloran, who you might know the name of from The Shining. In the book, Eddie was also friends with Paul Sheldon, who is the author of Misery. One thing I love about King's books is how they're all connected in some way or another, and we even get the mention of Shawshank quite a bit. But back to the Black Spot, that was burned down by the Order of White Decency, which were a version of the KKK. We then see the shopkeeper intervene, which shows that not everyone in the town's willing to let things slide. Chased to the quarry from the photo, we then hear the others discuss their encounters. Each one of them said a run-in that shook them to the core, with them all being different monsters. However, all of them saw a clown. Stephen King, though, was a massive fan of the Universal monster movies, and this is why so many of them appear throughout the book. Because yeah, they're what scared him as a kid. They finally realised that all these attacks are connected though, and it's a monster that's causing all the trouble in Derry. They've all kept it quiet so they didn't seem crazy, but Richie's public outburst has made them all realise. It's here that Mike arrives after being chased by the gang, and I really like how Henry is the other threat to the kids and a constant annoyance to them. Now this bit all mainly takes place in the apocalyptic Rockfight chapter. Major moments are cut though, such as Henry poisoning Mike's dog, and we learn just why the bully's the way he is. Butch Bowers, his father, was a World War II vet who fought in the Pacific. Suffering from PTSD, this eventually sent him mentally ill. The town gossiped that the war had turned him crazy, and over time he became more and more of an outcast. This caused his farm to fall into disrepair, and he took it out on his son. He also painted swastikas on Mike's dad's thriving business, which he blamed for taking his away. Mr. Bowers is not included in the miniseries, which I do think's a real shame. Even just one or two scenes would have, I think, really added to why Henry's the way he is. Though not part of the Losers Club, Henry's actually a major kid character in the book and show, and yet to have it omitted, whereas the other kids get their parents and you see how bad it is, I think it would have added a bit, or quite a lot to be fair. In the book, Henry also ended up being given a knife by Pennywise, which led to him killing his father. Pennywise had basically let him off the leash, and he went to another level of psychopathy. Sadly, a lot of that is cut for time, but it's so satisfying seeing the Losers Club defeat Henry Bowers and his friends. They work together, and it's their first real victory. I think everyone, has that bully that used to make fun of them, and one of my most satisfying memories is standing up to mine. Ultimately, they back down, as all bullies are just cowards on the inside. But yeah, you look back to like school photos, and you're like, this is the kid who was a nightmare, and it's like a 3-foot tall kid, but back then terrifying. But now I'm just like, yeah, crazy to think everyone was kind of terrorized by this guy. But Mike is then asked to join after the fight, and we get a conversation that goes like this.
Why are you guys anywhere?
We're sort of a club.
Yeah, the Losers Club.
What are we, some kind of losers club? They then adopt the name that Henry called them, and in owning it, it's no longer a weakness. We then see Mike take the photo that brought on this memory earlier, and in their wood base he then tells them the history of Derry. They instantly recognise Pennywise the clown, and he's been at each of the disasters in the town's past. The album then becomes possessed, just like we saw with Georgie's album. It horrifies the kids, and I think it's great how the black and white photo transitions into colour and comes alive. It then says,
"I'll kill you all,"
which repeats Bauer's line from earlier.
"I'll kill you all. I'll kill you all."
Further showing how their two big fears mirror each other. I have even thought sometimes, right, like, is Henry Bowers really Pennywise, and being kids, our imagination makes them think it's this killer clown. Henry later confesses to the crimes, and yeah, though he's taken the fall, there is that read on it that there's this psychotic kid who cuts his name into people's stomachs, goes around with a knife trying to kill them in the drains. You know, would you misremember that as being a really scary clown? Maybe not, but I think it's a read worth discussing. It is this line that Pennywise later repeats to Henry though, and what gets him to break out the asylum.
Kill them.
Stan then slams the book shut as he's in denial and clearly the most scared of them all.
I just want to forget about it.
Bill is clearly torn apart by his brother's death though, and the fact his murderer is still out there. Thus, he begs the Losers Club to help him. Jumping to the 90s, we then finally see Stanley. His wife's repairing some clothes, and she's also reading a paper. The scariest thing in the movie, though, is his wife having her shoes on the sofa. Whew, bone-chilling. Now, watching Perfect Strangers, another ABC show, which is when Stan gets the phone call. In the book, we saw things from his wife's point of view and learned they couldn't have kids despite constantly trying. Their parents kept asking when they'd have them, and eventually they just stopped asking, which was even more painful than constantly being asked. Such a tragic story though, in which they have to deal with going for tests, feeling worthless, and eventually just giving up. This is actually the chapter that I mentioned before, but that's the one that lasts over 4 hours, and you basically get an entire novel's worth of their lives. As we know though, none of the losers can have kids, which is a byproduct of their curse. All of them are pretty much living parallel lives in which they go on to be successful, can't have kids, and also feel isolated. The miniseries later says how the curse finally gets broken, and in the end, Ben got Bev pregnant. Now, like Ben and Bill, his childhood tics come back, and we see as Bev shows she's a crack shot with the slingshot. The lads are like, "No, get the camera! They also talk about the silver coins, slash earrings, slash silver bits in whatever version you're reading. And Richie was probably inspired by the werewolf, as he thinks silver can take out Pennywise. This is a major moment for Ben, as in the books he attempted to try and make silver bullets. And yeah, that goes into these silver coin slash earring things here. We then see how Eddie's reluctant to go and fight the clown, while they all take a hit of his inhaler. It's sort of like having a whiskey for some courage, but we know it's a placebo. Like Pennywise though, just how he's made real, their imagination makes this real as well. Because it's an abstract creature that's based off what's in your mind, it's also the best way to defeat it. This is also why I didn't tend to go after adults. Their fears are things like bills, no one hitting the thumbs up on their video, and how they're going to pay for our memberships and shirts. Luckily, we have a deal on this store right now where the more you buy, the more of a discount you get. We've not only got our Pennywise inspired shirt, which you can see here, but we've also got ones for Alien Earth, James Bond, fantastic design that, and it all goes towards helping videos like this get made. The Pennywise one, it's even double-sided with a dancing clown saying you'll float too, so yeah, go check them out and thank you for all your support. Now as the group head into the sewers, we see as they're followed by Henry and the gang. Their psychotic nature is shown, as Henry says they've chased a dog down here before. Obviously, torturing animals is a trait of a serial killer, and Henry planned to kill the gang and leave them here for good. Also, love how the lads send Bev up to the front when they find a piece of clown's clothing. Very chivalrous. The Deadlights then come for one of the bullies, and I love the point of view shot here. In the book, we actually get some POV chapters where we learn that it was scared after the first fight. The creature doesn't normally feel fear, as nothing tends to be a match for it, and that power is demonstrated when it pulls the kid through the pipe and turns Henry Bauer's hair white. You might also notice that the kid who gets pulled through has a completely blank expression. Seeing the Deadlights is often too much for the human mind to comprehend, and witnessing it can send you insane. Stan then runs off and meets back up with the rest of the group. We see part of its true form fly over the kids, which feels very Lovecraftian. Feels like it's been lifted from the legendary author's work, and I did wonder if the turtle stuff was inspired by Terry Pratchett. Richie thinks they've won, but the nightmare has only really begun as mist starts to rise. No, not that mist, but it might be. It's Stephen King, mate, and we are reaching. They all stay together and resist the being by refusing to be scared. We see Georgie, Bev's father, the werewolf, and finally Pennywise, who takes Stanley. He's the only one who fails to resist, and he falls foul of the clown. His reciting of the scouting code fails and gives an insight into why he ends his life. In chapter 2 added in a section that King stated improved on his work. There Stan ends his life because he knows he's a weak link and will fail them if it comes down to it. Here we do kind of get the groundwork for that, so I did appreciate that Andy Machete at least picked up on that. Here though, I think they kind of underused Stan, and he's just a rather tragic character. Pennywise then says how they taste better when they're afraid, which is similar to the book. Basically goes over how fear salts the meat, so to speak. However, they have a secret weapon, their childhood imagination. Eddie uses his own fear of his mother's insistence that he's sickly by hitting him with his inhaler. Even saying it's battery acid, which it isn't, but the belief it is more powerful than anything that it has. Bev then finishes it off with the silver slugs, which send it down the hole. It's some insanely ropey VFX here, but using their fear against it helps them win the day. Interestingly, it actually rained quite a lot when they were filming these scenes, so they saved a lot of money on the effects. Its hand then turns into the spider they'll see as an adult, but it sounds like it's dead. They aren't too sure, but for now, it's over. Time to repress and suppress all this trauma. But Pennywise, preying on their fears of children, makes them more succumb to it because they're younger and their imagination runs wild. Stanley was also the most afraid because he got attacked the latest and didn't have as much time to get over that fear. In the book, Bill also used he thrusts his fist against the post and still insists he sees the ghost, which comes from speech therapy, and he then talks about it in episode 2, which we'll get into in just a bit. In the book, though, in order to defeat it, they actually went into the ritual of Chud, which wasn't included here. There they discuss what the being actually is and cite that it might be a glamour. This is a metaphysical being which is called all sorts of different names across all corners of the world. They settled on the idea that the ritual of Chud could defeat it and practice this down in the sewers. Now in Himalayan tradition, a wise man will go and defeat a tailess by engaging in this ritual. How they'd enact this is stick their tongue out and the creature would then do the same. They then lock them together and engage in a battle of the mind. This included telling jokes and riddles, and if the man won, the tailors would disappear for a century. In the battle, Bill does this and flies through the macroverse and sees a turtle that we mentioned earlier. I'm kind of glad the director didn't read the book, because yeah, I would have skipped over this shit as well. We then get a really weird chapter where they're unable to escape the sewers. About one by one, they have sex with Bev, and this matures them to the point that they can leave. It's described in very graphic detail, with Bev even commenting on who the biggest is, and yeah, even to this day, King still gets shit for it. I can't even imagine writing this in the script and getting the kids to read it, and even if they were reading the book for research, and yeah, best to just avoid all that and cut it completely. In every version from now until the end of time. On the surface, they then make an oath to come back and defeat it for good if it returns. In the book, it's a blood oath and they all cut their hands. Over time, these fade like the memories, but they reappear after the phone calls. You might also notice that Stanley's the one who doesn't swear to return at first and only does it when he feels like he's forced to. Makes sense, again, why he ended his life, as he was clearly just in the position where he didn't want to face that evil again. Just like the book, his wife finds him and is horrified at seeing his dead body. She has a lot of guilt over the fact that she sat and just watched her show while he went to the bath, clearly distressed. It's a harrowing moment that ends the first part of the miniseries with him writing it in his blood. Oh, I opened it on the fucking page. I always remember seeing this when I was reading it and being like, whoa, they've got a picture in a book. They've actually made a picture. Yeah, and there you can see how it's written in the book, and then they bring that to the movie. And I swear down, I don't have this bookmarked or anything. I opened it on that page because I'm gonna defeat Pennywise. It was meant to be the turtle is my ally. But yeah, on a sadder note, it's just another case of Pennywise claiming another victim through fear. Now, the original broadcast then ended with us getting a to be continued. It aired on a Sunday, and that really puts the scary in Sunday scaries, which adults can relate to, I'm sure. As mentioned though, the book has the past and present run simultaneously right until the end. So the ritual is like the last chapter, and we jump back and forth through time as the ritual happens in the past and then also in the present. For episode 2, we then open on Bill, who arrives at Georgie's grave. The clowns dug a load of graves, one for each of the losers. However, one is taken already as Stanley has died, which they don't know yet. Meeting in the library, Mike explains that as he never left, he didn't forget what happened. Bill remembers that Bev also lived here and that this is Poor Town. Mike says it still is, and oop, awkward, this is where he lives. Sorry you're not a hotshot author like me, Mike. How's your YouTube channel doing? Oh, 500 views, you fucking piece of shit. You'll live in Poor Town forever, Mike, you sucker. Nah, but I don't want to sound like I'm looking down on people with 500 views. I started off with 500 views once. So good on you, mate. You keep going, mate, and you might be a hotshot YouTuber like me. Now, to help Bill remember, Mike then shows him silver. It's very different in the book, as Bill comes across it later after the meal with his friends. He finds it in the pawn shop, just as Mike mentions here. He also uses the phrase about thrusting his fists against the post to get over his returning stutter. Touching it, he then remembers riding it as a kid, and later the two guys fix it up. Just like the book, they put together the tires and service this childhood treasure. However, we get a wildly bizarre montage of the guys riding it. The book just has the cards spooking them, and we move on as there's two aces of spade in the decks, which is weird, and despite having fun, they're reminded that things are strange in this town. Funnily enough, John Ritter actually kept one of the cards with Pennywise's face on it. Either way, moving on, in between this we see Richie singing the Beach Boys as he's upset that Paramount's closed. This was the favourite part of his childhood, and it reminds him how everything ends. Poor Richie then heads to the library as Pennywise taunts him. He just goes wild, bursts balloons full of blood in front of people's faces, and shouts over the top of him talking, so he just looks like a guy screaming in the library.
Yeah, Mike Hanlon, that I had to go, that I had to get cleaned up.
Do you have Prince Albert in a can? You do? Well, you better let the poor guy out.
You're all too old.
The line about the woman being too old for him and the Albert in the can gag, they're all right out the book. The scene in the story actually had Ben getting spooked there, but yeah, they didn't really do the groundwork here to have him as a bookworm. There though, they returned to his childhood safe haven and he got a new library card. Now due to Richie getting Ben's scenes, he returns to Derry and retraces his footsteps in the woods. He has the most 80s piece of tech, which is a Palm PC, which I haven't seen in a long time. He then goes back to where he tumbled down into the barrens and met the losers for the first time. He then sees a kid being chased, just like him, but part of me wonders if that was even real. Especially as we see his dad's skeleton right after this. It's probably the least spookiest out of all the spooks for the adults, as he then sees a balloon that says, "Turn back now." I feel like similar to Richie with his cinema thing, it's showing that things are getting worse and everything's decaying. The skeletons now replace that standing man, and it kind of symbolizes that everything's just rotting. We then see Eddie, who heads into the pharmacy that he frequented as a child. This scene is right out the book as Mr. Keen tries to help Eddie break the illusion. Sort of how the children have to do it on their own, he basically questions his fears. Eddie's terrified of everything and believes that he has severe allergies. But ultimately, it's fear, and I love how he has to overcome this in his mind. Poor Eddie believes his mother though, and won't be told otherwise. Kinda like how trauma can be cyclical. In the present day, we see an older Keen who's old and decrepit. Again, highlighting how everything's destroyed by time. He says, "I was always partial to licorice," which is a deep cut from the book, as here we hear about his love for the sweetening interlude. There, Mike interviews the older Mr. Keen about a shootout with some gang members back in the day, way before the Loser Club formed or were even born. He offers Mike licorice multiple times, so it's a great Easter egg for book readers. He also says H2O eye drops, and that it's all in his head, which is what he thought about when handing over the asthma medicine to Bill. Eddie's then grabbed by the claw we saw under Pennywise's glove, and it's clear the clown's talking through Mr. Keen. He then wants them to turn around, but why would the creature give them this heads up when it could quite easily feast on them? Well, again, adults are more difficult to fear, and it knows it's defeated them as children, so yeah, it's gonna be way worse here. It is completely terrified, and it's basically giving them this warning almost like it's a favour, but yeah, it's very, very scared. We then cut to Bev, who returns home looking for her father. This is a pretty similar scene of the book, and it's one of the scariest parts of it, chapter 2. She sees Marsh, but it changes to Kirsch, which is a little sign that things aren't right. She then heads into the bathroom, which is a grim reminder of hearing the kids in the sink. The room's been updated to look a lot nicer though, but yeah, something just ain't right here. Miss Kirsch invites her in and says she used to be a mosh. She also says that she knew her father, and in hindsight, this could explain that it was Pennywise corrupting him to be abusive. The woman then sips the tea and her teeth turn yellow before Bev's cup turns to blood. Eventually, she transforms into a full rotting corpse that carries her father's voice.
Won't do you any good to run, baby.
Running outside, she's almost hit by a van and sees the grim reality. The house is really just boarded up and run down. Again, I'm going to repeat myself, playing into that idea of decay. I feel like it's definitely the highlight out of all the returns though, and the only one with a genuinely spooky moment. The director deliberately did not have any extras when Bev was in the street, and this was done to make it look creepy. We then cut to Audra back in England, who's chastised by a man named Greco, who's possibly a replacement for the Attic Room's producer Freddie Firestone. The argument is largely the same as in the book though, as Audra then follows her husband to Derry. The producer also hits on her and threatens to turn her into an enemy should she decide to leave. He despises Bill, and our Losers Club leader hinted how he hated him at the start of the movie. Despite this, she goes anyway. In the book, she then crosses paths with Tom Rogan, who follows her and realizes she looks a lot like his wife. Here though, the love triangle takes a back seat. The reunion starts as each of the grown-ups meet at the Chinese restaurant, which is a massive part of the book. Richie prangs out and vomits once again, which he also did after the call in the book and show. Bev is also overcome with emotion as she faints, and yeah, luckily Eddie was like, "Oh, I'm ready, mate, I'm ready," because my reactions are terrible, mate, and she would have hit the floor like the like button, eh? Ben is clearly still in love with her though, which Ritter shows in his actions. She then kisses Bill lovingly, and it's kind of like the one who got away. Interestingly, in the book, she actually has sex with Bill at this point. Audra, I hardly knew her. In the book, it's here she remembers sleeping with all of them in the sewers, which yeah, I can understand just suppressing this because I've almost suppressed it myself. I know it's supposed to symbolize him growing up, King, yeah, but very sus. Eddie then mentions how when he returned, a looming veil came over and he remembered what happened. Bev says the word skewers, which causes Eddie to break down in some pretty dodgy acting. They are wondering where Stanley is though, and we get another cheesy montage of the friends eating a succulent Chinese meal. What is the crime, Pennywise? Eating a succulent Chinese meal? We interestingly have the same song play from when they built the dam, which was a key moment in the formation of their friendship. They discuss their love life as Richie says he's been down the altar a few times and Eddie says he's seeing someone. Turns out he's a virgin though, mate. But he says that he didn't find anyone else to love other than the group, but you didn't remember them, so why did he not find anyone else? But yeah, all that is still, I'd prefer he's a virgin than we get the scene with Beverly in the book, mate, to be fair. Either way, they all talk about how Henry confessed to all the murders, and due to the death stopping because of Pennywise's defeat, the police ended up believing him. In the book, he was actually pushed to confess to all the murders and then sent to Juniper Hill, with it being hills in the miniseries, but we're being thorough. It's a brutal place, and it's wild to know he's just been made to sleep in the hallway. Also, yeah, I know he was a couple of years older than the kids, but he looks like 15 years older here. Old as shit. In one of the weirdest moments in the movie, we then see Pennywise appear on the moon, which might be a reference to the 1902 movie A Trip to the Moon. In the book, we actually saw his childhood friends speak to him, but yeah, I totally get why they just went to Pennywise, because you'd be like, been a week? Who the hell is this guy? Like a week since the last episode if you were watching it at the time, you know what I mean. He's then given his trademark flick knife as Pennywise kills the orderly, who's called Kuntz. Pennywise appears as a dog in the book, which is explained a bit more there, but its head was not that of a man or clown. It was the head of a Doberman Pinscher, the only animal on God's green earth of which John Kuntz was frightened. Kuntz then drops a roll of coins, and in the book, they use these to beat the patients. Seeing these further sends Henry off the deep end, and he just goes mental. The orderly's name may also be a reference to Dean Koontz, who's another horror author. Cutting back to the dinner, Richie wants to leave, and Ben says, let Mike speak before they're scattered to the four winds.
Suppose we give Mike a chance to fill us in before we scatter to the four winds, or is that too much trouble?
Which is something Mike thought of early in the book. And because they're scattered to the four winds, they have no way of knowing the identical patterns their lives have taken. Mike then says he's taken care of the bill and is clearly trying to keep their focus on the task. Sadly, they never discuss that he earns a very meager sum compared to the rest of them. and he's basically brought them all back, doing them a favor, paying for the meal, and wanting them to stay. The fortune cookies are then brought out, and Richie says,
"See my fortune now. You're gonna be eaten by a big greasy monster. Have a nice day."
Which is a line right out the book. They then open them up and see they contain blood, a cockroach, an eye, a spider, and a baby chick. The latter may even be a callback to the Bowers burning down Mike's barn, as mentioned earlier. The spider is, of course, once again hinting at the form of Pennywise in the final showdown. These creatures were all puppets though, and practical effects, which, looking at it, pretty impressive. In the book, the meal took place at lunchtime, and all of the scenes of the losers rediscovering Derry took place afterwards in the chapter walking tours. But I prefer it being at night. This also allows them to go back to the library in the evening. I love how the blood is also still there from Richie's vision, which has infected them all. It also triggers Beverly into remembering when she was a kid, desperately trying to clean the bathroom. Richie says that if Stan doesn't reply, then he's a dead man, and ironically, they then learn his fate. Mike actually already knew it in the books and revealed this grim news at the meal, but it would have ruined the succulent Chinese meal. Does work well here though, and basically the pace kicks up and the final hour flies by. We then cut to a flashback of Bill riding his bike with Stan on the back. It's a scene that Bill remembered when he touched the bike, and the one we get in the book. Stan then sprints towards him, and we know that Stan saw Pennywise the same day they went into the sewers. In the book, he actually looked right into its deadlights after coming across the being at a house. This was the Stan pipe, which is where he saw the mummy. He holds out the bird book almost like a shield, and in the book, Pennywise at one point appears like a giant bird. It's possible that this was inspired by the house on Nearbolt Street, and I just love the idea there's a house in your area full of monsters and demons. The biggest spook thus far then happens when we see Stanley Uris's head in the fridge. The same one that Mike kept his beer in, which, yeah, better not have drank that, mate. In the book, it's a little different though, as they're all adults and they brought their own booze. Looks like there's cans of Red Stripe as well, whereas Mike has Bud Light in the book. Look, we're being thorough. Now, they do the adult in the movie, the adult head, but in the book, it was actually a young Stan, which might have been done due to the actor's abilities, because he really sells that they all float down here. In the book, his mouth was stuffed with feathers and his head then rolled out on the floor. Balloons also came out and warned them to turn back, but sadly, it's not utilized in the movie. But yeah, the balloons constantly recur throughout. The effect here used was a split screen where the actor was filmed from the head up and then projected onto the refrigerator, with the dummy then being used for the wide shots. Bill once more then tries to repeat the words.
He thrusts his
He thrusts his fist against the post and still insists he sees the ghosts.
Which again kind of goes back to when he was fighting Pennywise in the book and trying to regain his control of the situation. Basically, he got his vocabulary flowing, but Pennywise has weaponized it to silence him. Ending the library scene, we then see Pennywise drop a rainstorm inside. There's also one at the asylum, and it basically foreshadows the flooding that happens at the end. They all head back to the Derry Inn, which is where they're staying at. In the book, this was the Derry townhouse, but we're being thorough, and Mike has a full box of helmets with torches, which he wanted to tell them he had in the book. Richie then goes off, and we get beep beep Richie again. And yeah, says it constantly, like all the fucking time in the book. Listen to the audio book and read it, and Richie's constant shit does my head in. Once one of the most annoying characters I've ever read. But on an analytical level, I've seen many people have a myriad of different interpretations of this. On the surface, the kids say when he's going too far, and it's a way for them to control the situation and just calm him down. Some say it's the kids referring to the Roadrunner's catchphrase, meaning that he's running his mouth. Others have said that in the 50s, comedians would have been buzzed or beeped off stage. Considering he's usually telling jokes non-stop, I think this is the most likely. We then see Eddie try and cope by taking his inhaler. Even though he hints he knows it's a placebo, it's still sort of his comfort blanket. Bev even enables him by saying it's good medicine, and it works because he believes. Mike then says how their togetherness made them strong, and it's something that helped them survive. Predators usually try to isolate children, which can't happen here. Pennywise mostly attacks them when they're alone, except on a few occasions. As mentioned earlier, we talked about Beverly's flashback and how the adults in the town turned a blind eye to Bowers assaulting them. This is what made her realize that something was wrong with the town and that it had infected the adults. The power of friendship is also explored later as Bev remembers how the lads helped her clean up the blood. We then catch up with poor old Audra as she's racing to get to her husband. She's largely just reduced to someone who needs saving, but in the book, her inner monologue provides a lot of detail on her and Bill's relationship. Ultimately, she's a great way to show how fear can paralyze you and stop you from acting out. She's sent into a catatonic state and metaphorically sums up the partners of the Losers Club. However, as this is TV, again, a lot had to be cut. She's taken by Pennywise though, which feels superfluous here. Even if it's important as she's in his nest later. But yeah, not really needed, and she's kind of Bill's anchor outside of Derry and a reminder of the future that they have outside the town. Again, they cut that in the book, including that Tom Rogan was following her. There, he was the one who actually kidnapped her and he was doing Pennywise's bidding. Back at the hotel, Ben then explains how he lost weight. Like most of the kids, he left town not too long after their summer adventure. Ben's story here is given much more detail in the book, as he explained how he and his mother moved to Nebraska to live with family members. Ben's also rubbing Bev's shoulders while he explains this and offers to get her shawl as he can tell that she's cold. My guy is a tier 3 simp and he goes to her room to get it. Bill says don't go alone, but then all the characters go to their rooms alone, which just sets up the perfect time for poor old Ben to be caught out. Pennywise tricks him into thinking that Bev's confessing her love for him. It's his ultimate fantasy come true, but in a clear nod to The Shining, he then sees the truth in the mirror. Later on at the hospital, she confesses her love for real, but it's something that Ben doesn't trust, which is completely understandable, especially with the whole sewers bit, mate. Proper sloppy sevenths there. Meanwhile, Henry Bowers attacks Mike, but when getting on top, he's pulled off and then stabs himself. His sad little life is over, and he goes out like the coward that he is. However, it goes down a little different in the book, as Henry has a lot more backstory. He even has a chapter where he and his mates keep farting, and a whole thing about how beans would make his family toot. But we need to cut it, which is unfortunate because it's a very important scene. Then explained how he left his friends to die and ran off when Pennywise attacked. Again, playing off how he ran when confronted in the Rockfight. In the book, he then tracks down Mike to the library, and it's at this location where he attacks him. He then goes to the hotel to kill each one of the losers one by one. However, like the movie here, Eddie has a hand in his death after Henry tries to take him out. In both the book and miniseries, the bully's last words are also "Gug." Bloody Gug. What does it mean? What does it mean? The switchblade that he has here is also the same one from when he was a kid, which again was a present that Pennywise gave him to basically go and kill his dad with. Thankfully, the 2017 and 2019 movies delve a bit more into Henry Bowers' psyche. But they avoided the farting and even, I'm sure there's like a handy J, we'll say, in the woods, which, yeah, best to cut it because it's weird. They also didn't rush Mike to hospital, as in the book he was already there, but I think this change makes it more exciting for the show. In the end though, with Stanley dead and Mike laid up in bed, it's going to be a tough job defeating the clown. Outside, Bev then recites the haiku to Ben, with the pair confirming their love. In the book, he actually told her as a child when they were trying to run away from Henry Bowers. It's something that she forgot, and she assumed that Bill wrote it because, yeah, he grew up to be a professional writer. But I'll be honest as well, the haiku is shit. It's terrible haiku. At the hospital, Bill then comes up with a cover story as Mike reveals that he kept the silver slugs all this time. One will represent Mike and the other will represent Stan, and they'll be used to then go and defeat Pennywise on a spiritual level. Turns out that Mike actually went back to the sewers alone, which is where he found them, and he was thinking that he could end his life by basically going to confront Pennywise head on. It was a bold plan, and I wouldn't want it to go out that way. However, upon finding these silver slugs, he saw them as being a second chance. Deciding to get his life together, Mike understands that if he really wants to leave Derry, then they have to vanquish this evil. They also debate about what to do with Henry's body. They're alone against the evil of the town, and they have to handle this all by themselves. But I would just dump him in the sewers, mate, which is better than the plan that they come up with. They basically just put a rug over the top of him and leave him at the hotel and hope for the best.
People, that is a dead body. You're not seriously suggesting we walk out of here and leave it lying there?
Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting.
Okay, mate, we'll see what happens when scientists discover DNA. Fucking check the sign-in book and they're bang to rights. It's weird how not a single staff member heard any of the commotion and doesn't immediately call the police and have them all arrested. Like even the ones like seeing Mike getting rushed off to the hospital, like no one on the desks checking on the guests. But yeah, they all decide that they're going to leave, but Richie then sees another murders on the news, and it shows that if they basically leave behind their duty, then more kids will die. To be fair with Henry's body, I doubt the police are going to care, because it's like a murder every day here. I did chuckle though when the fangirl on the desk, she once spilled to sign the book, but she I would be like, genuinely, did he not hear anything at all? Bill then hears for Elise and he remembers his promise and debt to Georgie. It's what makes him decide to go down and take out the evil once and for all. I did wonder though if this was given to him by the turtle, because I doubt Pennywise would want to stop them from leaving. He then gives a speech and remembers begging for help, which is when they're inspired to go and finally take down Pennywise. They all hug once again, just like they did in the Barrens when he said he needed help. Returning to the pipe, Richie finally decides that he has to help the rest of his friends. Ben remembers the pom-poms, but Bill's shocked to see Audra's purse. He runs off alone, which is the one thing he shouldn't do, as staying together's their strength. He's also the kids' leader, which is why Pennywise used his wife to spook him out. We also see spiderwebs line the corridor, and it foreshadows the spider form. Going through the pipe, we then see the red light that's synonymous with Pennywise. It chooses to use red for most of the balloons, and it fits in with the blood that it's gonna usher forth. Ooh, sounds ominous that. Entering the place, they first beat it, they then find it completely overgrown. I do wonder if people even come down here anymore, and yeah, it's crazy to think like we have all these tunnels under us that people rarely if ever go down. I chuckled at Eddie as well, as he looks like some 1920s explorer, but yeah, whatever makes you feel brave. Some people even dress as James Bond, I've heard. As yeah, that they also then see Georgie's boat. It's a great full circle moment, as this is where the nightmare started for Bill, and it's also where he saw his brother, which is what he sees again here. Luckily it disappears when Bill remembers it's not real, which is a continuation of the first encounter. Pennywise then appears like some sort of projection on the wall, taunting them and saying how they'll see the deadlights. Bill surmises though that the physical form has to be here. We then get a hint that Bill and Bev will end up together as he's holding her very close. Beverly then uses the boat to guide them to the lair. Due to how sturdy it is, it was able to float the entire way and take them to the heart. This leads them to a tiny door and what's been lying at the center. The lair is ominous and creepy, and it reminds me of something from the Goonies. Or more specifically, something like Shelob's lair in The Lord of the Rings. Also, maybe even Montezuma's at the Metro Center. If you know, you know. Bill then sees Audra all caught up in its webbing, reminding me of the cocoon scenes in Aliens. In hindsight, you know, having watched Lord of the Rings recently, it's also very similar to when Frodo appeared in Return of the King, which, if they'd read the book before this, may have inspired that. The spider animation is very dodgy though, and I feel like the movie falls apart a bit when it reveals the mystery. However, the spider ended up costing about $200,000, which was a big budget sink at the time. It weighed 500 pounds, was operated by remote control, and was unlike anything made for TV. It even had a person inside of it to add some extra control. If it looks weird moving about though, there is a reason. Due to how heavy it was, the spider was shot in super slow motion. It was then sped up, which ultimately made it appear like the stop motion creatures from Jason and the Argonauts. It's vastly overpowered and pretty quickly kills Eddie. This gives Beverly the chance to fire the silver, and the spider then retreats as they all say their goodbyes. R.I.P. Virgin Bozo. Nah, but it did always kind of annoy me that Eddie was killed, and I always wish they'd kept him alive. Deciding to finish the job, they then basically go and kick the shit out of it. Push it over, push it over. Ripping its heart out, we then see the deadlights go out once and for all. The book had another time recurrence of the ritual of Chud, and then the storm ravages the city. Audra and some of the victims are then lowered, and we see as they go out to the surface. Cutting to their oath as a kid, Mike writes a journal entry before he inevitably forgets it. He decides to leave his position as the quote-unquote lighthouse keeper and head somewhere down the road. Eddie is never forgotten by Richie though, and he goes on to star in movies with someone just like his childhood friend. The movie did a great job of showing their friendship, as Eddie's mostly with Richie. The movie's clapperboard also says J. Bezuick, which is a reference to Gene Bezuick, who was the script supervisor. Audra is also in a catatonic state, but Bill decides to beat the devil one last time. Riding out on silver with her on the frame, it finally awakens her. Beat the Devil is the name of the final chapter in the book, and it's him finally vanquishing the evil. Sadly though, in both the book and miniseries, their memory fades and they go back to their adult lives once more and don't really remember Derry. At least our boy Ben ends up with Bev, but I've always wondered, like, do they even remember how they got together in the first place? Derry is actually pretty destroyed as a result of killing it though, but the miniseries avoids all of that and just gives us a nice happy ending. But we do hear one last laugh from the clown. This might be the final scare, but it also hints that it isn't actually dead. Pennywise later appeared in the Tommyknockers, which was set after it. There's also possible further proof in King's book Dreamcatcher. There we saw graffiti on a plaque commemorating the victims, saying Pennywise lives. Either way, that wraps up the movie / TV show, and I'd of course love to hear your thoughts. Did you enjoy it? Do you think it holds up? Isn't it crazy that this was just 10 years before Lord of the Rings and CGI and effects advanced that much? Isn't it crazy? Right, yes, if you agree. Obviously though, if you've got a more in-depth thought out comment than that, then please leave it below. And if you want to keep up to date with what we're doing, then make sure you follow us at Instagram on Instagram at Heavy Spoilers. It's very early when I'm recording this, and as you can see, it's been a very long video. Speaking of keeping up to date with us as well, if you want to watch videos like this every week, early before anyone else, then make sure you check out our membership by just clicking the join button. For just 99 cents a month, you'll get an in-depth breakdown like this every single week, a week before anyone else gets to see them publicly, and it all goes towards helping us do big in-depth breakdowns in the first place. So it's kind of like a cyclical thing. It's a pyramid scheme basically. If you tell everyone to sign up for 99 pence and they get people to sign up for 99 pence, at the end of it, I'll be able to just spend my days doing this stuff instead of getting an actual job. So I appreciate it, and with that out of the way, thank you for watching this video. We've got a breakdown of something else on screen right now. And I've been your host, Paul. You have been the best as always, and I will see you next time. Take care. Peace.